So we're going to start. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us here. I'm humbled and honored to be speaking to you today, and that you've chosen to come and listen to our story, cloud migration story that Jim Fowler alluded to in his opening remarks this morning. So my name is Patrick Keyser. I am with Sogeti, and I realize that a lot of you might not know who Sogeti is. So we are a part of the Capgemini group and a long-standing IT solutions provider to GE. With me today, I have Rachel North, who is the engagement leader for that journey, Ben Cabanas, who's the cloud director at GE Oil and Gas, who is with us every step of the way in that journey, and Ben Wilson, Chief Technical Officer. Chief Technical Officer for GE Oil and Gas.
It is not.
Yeah, thanks for that. So on the monitors, you have what you can expect from this session. It's going to be fairly technical, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. One thing that you might not see in this session that I'm just going to mention myself is that there were other things that we had to do from even an engagement model standpoint between the two companies to more rapidly move clouds to the applications to the cloud. So we actually changed our engagement model to enhance and incent the GE business and even our business to rapidly move applications to the cloud. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ben Cabanas, who's going to take it over.
Am I safe to turn this on now? Yeah. Apparently so. So good afternoon. As Patrick mentioned, my name is Ben Cabanas. I'm actually no longer with GE Oil and Gas. I took a new role in GE Corporate, but I was fortunate enough to begin this journey with GE Oil and Gas and really begin the journey to the cloud, and specifically to AWS. So what we're going to talk about today is, we'll actually get to this in a minute. So if you would please indulge me, I'd like to make this a little bit interactive. So if I could ask you all, please just stand up. It's after lunch, good opportunity to stretch. And I'll try and make this brief, but if you're here representing a Fortune 500 company, can you remain standing? The rest of the folks in the room, please sit down. Okay, so if you're representing a Fortune 100 company, remain standing. The rest of the folks, please sit down. Okay, so we have Fortune 100.
Tell these yo-yos to sit down over here. These are oil and gas guys. Tell them you guys sit down. You guys don't count.
No, stand up. Stand up.
Okay.
So if you're a Fortune 100 company and you have migrated at least 100 applications to AWS in particular, can you remain standing? All right. If you're a Fortune 100 company and you have migrated more than 200 applications to AWS, can you remain standing? Okay. And more than 250 applications.
Who do you work for? Accenture. Okay.
Accenture, okay. Very good.
What a great answer.
And so now if you're part of the GE Oil and Gas team, can you please sit down? And so we're left with just this one gentleman from Accenture. Thank you very much. Thank you. The reason I do that is really, having been involved in this journey for so long, this is just natural for me to see this type of progress and these results that I think speak for themselves. It's hard for me to fathom that other companies aren't really doing this at the same pace necessarily. But we're going to drill down into the oil and gas story in particular. You heard from Jim Fowler this morning, the GE ecosystem of applications. We have close to 9,000 applications in the company. Most of those are really commercial off-the-shelf applications. So it's created quite a challenge. In oil and gas specifically, we set out on a very aggressive journey. Almost 18 months ago, We went all in with AWS, and the focus was on speed of execution. For a number of reasons. I think most of you are probably familiar with all of the pressures in the oil and gas industry right now, but you can very clearly see the results. In oil and gas, we have close to 1,000 applications, about 528 business applications, and roughly 400 enabling tools and technologies. Of those, 261 applications have been moved to AWS specifically. We'll talk more about migration parties. Actually, Ben Wilson, our CTO for oil and gas, will talk about migration parties in depth. But during one of these migration parties, we moved 24 applications in Florence that went live in AWS in 1 week. It's been a sea change for provisioning cycle time. Generally, it's taken us between 3 to 6 months to stand up infrastructure, physical infrastructure anyway. We can now do that in 30 minutes or less. 50. Are you on?
Yeah. So, like Ben was saying, it's normally anywhere from 3 to 6 months to stand up infrastructure in the GE environment, and then anywhere from 6 months to a year to do your deployments, get through all your processes for being able to go live with that application. And what we've done is get to the point where we can now migrate an application in 15 days by using wing-to-wing migrations from design, build, employment, instead of the standard environment that we normally work in.
We had something when we first started this journey called an Enterprise Application Standards Team, which was a governing body stretched across all GE businesses, focused on building accelerators for the rest of the company to accelerate their cloud migration journey. Some of the things were built by GE Oil and Gas, and we'll go through these in more detail as well. Things like backup and recovery and our DNS delegation solution. You saw the number from Jim Fowler this morning in terms of TCO savings, raw TCO savings in our environment, and we've measured this at various intervals throughout this program, has been about a 52% savings in terms of TCO. We don't believe that that's entitlement. I mean, I think most of the benchmarks out there are around 75% to 78%. That grows with your maturity in the cloud and your ability to operate effectively. So we don't know how many clicks this is going to take, so whoever can guess. It's not about the metrics and the volume, though. It's not necessarily about the speed of implementation or the cost savings. It's about what it's driven for a business that was under increasing pressure to grow margin. And specifically, it was taking a business that was grounded in legacy IT, built from acquisition and integration. And we taught ourselves and we taught the rest of the business how to be agile, how to go faster flexibly. We built things that were much more resilient in a much faster time in AWS versus what we had internally. I saw a quote recently about, we don't build load balancers anymore, we configure load balancers. This is something that, is a manual process in most companies that requires either change tickets or service tickets and working across silos to implement. That kind of native resilience with auto-scaling groups, elasticity, multi-AZ, and ELBs is something that we have with the push of a button now. We drove a cloud-first mentality, and we created a single funnel for all engagements, whether that was for compute infrastructure or for new application deployments. And really, that cloud-first mentality became very pervasive throughout the business.
Yep, so along with this, not only did GE go through a transformation in the way that they normally run their applications, but we went with them and transformed our team really from a standard design, build, run type organization to a very much wing-to-wing effort where everyone is a comprehensive innovator and can do it from wing to wing.
The shift to SOA and microservices, this really is the era of APIs and stateless computing. We didn't have this. I think AWS was really our introduction to this new contemporary culture of development and architecture. Monolithic custom off-the-shelf or commercial off-the-shelf applications, they really slow us down. I mean, we look at some of our more monolithic ERP implementations, and it's 18 months to 2.5 years. The ability to spin resources up quickly has allowed us to drive a culture of rapid experimentation, has enabled our teams to go and learn some of these more contemporary technologies and infuse those into the portfolio.
And then in IT and software, especially for consultants, it's normally hard to define the value of what you're doing. And with software-defined everything and what we're doing, migrating these applications to AWS, it's really easy to justify, and you can normally see a return on investment within 1 to 6 months.
This is more of a graphical representation of the oil and gas cloud journey of the last 18 months. There's a few notable metrics here, but I think, if just looking at the graph, we spent the first 6 months of this program trying to figure out how we implement, just basic services. This is something that we had a lot of dialogue with AWS about too, in terms of enterprise capabilities. Every enterprise is different. The processes are different. How you plug into those processes and tools is very different. And we had to go figure out how to make some pretty basic things work. For instance, I wasn't willing to put a workload into AWS if I didn't understand how we were going to back it up or recover it if we had some sort of an issue. There's some basic capabilities like DNS that we had to have in place, and AD, for instance. Again, we'll talk more about the migration parties, but over 6 migration parties denoted by the little yellow dot there. We've moved almost 100 of those 261 applications. And the target by the end of the year is really to get to the 400 mark, which represents about 45% of our portfolio. We had an 80% cloud-first adoption penetration, so we mentioned that, I mentioned that funnel. This has really resulted in being able to evaluate everything coming through that funnel to make sure that if it was theoretically possible, that we made it happen in cloud first. I think one of the most striking metrics that I've seen here, and this is one that I really like to talk about, we measured our P0 and our P1 incidents, and these are business critical outages in our environment that we log with the help desk, and generally this represents some deficiency or business impact really anywhere in the chain. Right? In oil and gas, we had on average 1 every business day at a minimum. So generally in a month we would see between 20 and 25 really impactful business events. With 261 applications in AWS, we saw 3 in that same 6-month period. And there's a few reasons for that, and I think we'll touch on some of that here in a moment. We created additional cloud services. Some of those were focused on core services, but the overall velocity yield was about 50 applications per quarter. Our CIO liked to give us a really hard time because we committed to move an app a day. And this represents about 4.5 applications a week, so not quite there. We had a heavy focus on automation and something we call the bot army. We'll see a few examples of this as well. Within oil and gas, we've deployed 15 bots. You can see some of the metrics associated with it, targeted around optimization and eliminating human interaction for commodity things which we typically rely on. We've built self-service micro tools and things like synthetic application monitoring. We'll look at the architecture of that. In oil and gas, we have 50,000 requests for simple SQL script execution every year. And we were able to build a self-service framework, leveraging the mean stack, to allow our end users to go and execute that SQL themselves, because the human intervention in this process was simply non-value add. One of our basic principles as a team was measure everything. And so we have a number of KPIs. I'll highlight the ones that I think we're most proud of. Really 13, at this point, I think it's $13.5 million year-over-year savings as part of a broader simplification umbrella, and not necessarily a direct result of cloud migration. But a lot of the savings came from the cleanup that happened after contemporizing the portfolio. Just by sheer virtue of looking under the rock and understanding what was actually out there in our portfolio, we were able to eliminate 57 applications that were really no longer being used or were completely obsolete. We've eliminated 791 servers, and when we began this program, we had close to 2,400 servers in the environment. This is about a 30-35% reduction in compute assets. Over the last 2.5 years, with our simplification programs, we've actually eliminated 50% of the compute asset portfolio. And then the net result is 261 applications in the cloud. So we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the accelerators that got us here. I can't claim that this is going to work for everyone, that you should take these solutions as verbatim, as something you want to deploy. But it gives you an idea of some of the challenges that we faced and we had to go and solve, and the way that we solved them, the way that we worked, which I think is more important than the actual solutions themselves. So this is sort of a laundry list of some of the value-added services and capabilities that we built over the last 18 months. We talked about the self-service database. Wildcard DNS, we provisioned a DNS subdomain and got to the point where we could drop a configuration in an S3 bucket. This was a resilient solution that was had a bunch of Nginx proxy clusters sitting behind it. But normally, if we were to go through the manual process of submitting a change request or a ticket to get a DNS endpoint, it would have taken us the better part of a week just to have that provision. We weren't in a position where we could leverage Route 53. Our internal network teams were concerned about sprawl and administration of multiple DNS providers. So we very rapidly came up with a solution almost a year and a half ago to be able to allow us to move much faster than everyone else that sort of sat on the sidelines and waited for a more mature internal solution. Backup and recovery is another great example. We looked at multiple enterprise vendors, some of the same tools that we had used in our internal environment, very costly. We looked at open source options. At the end of the day, we built a simple script, relied on tagging and snapshots and an admin server to go provide the same functionality that we're paying vendors millions for today internally in the enterprise. We've submitted that internally as part of a patent process. A very, very slick solution. Active Directory we had to worry about. And some of these we're going to drill down into a little bit further here, so I won't cover all of them. But you have to understand what you're going to provision for infrastructure as a service monitoring. It's a big pain point for us today, with over 60,000 assets across the company. How do you have consistent metrics that are actionable and you can drive some event-driven alerting off of those metrics? We don't really have a consistent solution internally. So we had to go figure out what we were going to deploy. And once again, we sort of chose that open source option and route. Integrated billings. Thankfully we had a really good process of liquidating costs back to our CIO teams, providing some transparency and granularity at an application level. When we decided to leverage the Cloudability tool suite for liquidation of AWS services, it was kind of a natural fit, into the billing and liquidation process. But you may gloss over this saying this isn't really a technical solution, this is process, this is enterprise, but it's really important because it drives transparency for the application owners. It allows them, it sets the right expectations that they need to manage their costs, right? And we're going to provide them with tools to do that, but we don't want to be in that business. Let's drill down into a couple of the solutions here. So this is sort of the quintessential solution, and it's that because so many of these variables that we've already talked about are sort of worked their way in here. So I'm going to tell just a brief story. We had about 50 people co-located in Cincinnati. This was a cloud migration party. We had a number of applications in the pipeline that we were trying to take live. We had representation from our corporate teams. We had some ProServe partners, some AWS solution architects sitting with us in the room. And one of the teams raised their hand, and they said, look, I can't migrate this application because we have this FTP interface. It's not secure, it's not compliant, and frankly, it just won't work in this environment. So we all stood around a whiteboard. There were about 4 or 5 of us stood around a whiteboard, and we drew this picture. And if that's not interesting enough, a couple of us walked out of the room, leveraged the AWS SDK for Java, and actually just coded this in about 3 hours as a solution. So very rapid innovation and experimentation. This is a simple file interface. Traditionally, in the enterprise, we would use something like web methods, which is very costly, right, from a licensing standpoint, to accomplish something that's very similar. So it's the power of really AWS native services, that immediate value proposition of being able to leverage SNS, SQS, S3 as a really flexible solution. Also, about a year ago, around the same time frame, we were working again with AWS ProServe and came across an AWS partner called Racimi, and started experimenting with their capabilities for automated rehosting. Lift and shift is really kind of a bad word to us. We like to call it rehosting. There's a number of really valid use cases for rehosting, though. For instance, if I no longer have a code base, if my operating system configuration is so complex that I don't want to spend the time to dig into it, we found this to be definitely an accelerator in being able to pick up both virtualized and physical workloads with the press of a button. Very easy implementation here. We asked for a number of enhancements, like supporting STS, for instance, and Racimi has really provided that for us.
Yeah, one good use case that we actually used it for, we had a Windows 2003 server. Racimi it out to AWS, and they were able to upgrade it. So using that to kind of reduce obsolescence.
And this is one of my favorites because it's sort of my baby. We have a real challenge internally with synthetic monitoring because it generally takes about 6 weeks for us to go through this cycle and this process to implement a simple web transaction monitor. And the reason for that is because we have application owners and functional teams that understand how to click through the transaction in the browser, and then they have to take snapshots and screenshots, put those in a Word document, send those to another team that understands how to go and script out that transaction. We wanted to have a very self-service capability that was, the user experience was much more simplified, yet a solution that was really scalable. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Selenium. You may also be familiar with Sauce Labs, with New Relic. There's a number of companies out there that do synthetic monitoring, and they stand up synthetic monitoring farms with Selenium on the back end and a massive farm of servers, because Selenium traditionally runs in a real browser session. So you've got the memory overhead and the footprint of browser sessions, not incredibly scalable vertically, so typically these large, broad farms are provisioned. We decided we wanted to do something different. We wanted to simplify the user experience. We wanted a very scalable and open source solution. So we built a single page Node.js app. We implemented Selenium Builder, which is a simple browser add-on for Firefox. Within Selenium Builder, the user can actually just scrape their transaction and walk through their transaction as they normally would. It will spit out a script in the format of your choice. By default, it's JSON, but pick your poison. You can spit it out in JavaScript and upload it to New Relic if you like. Lots of capability there. What they do then is they upload that script to the single page Node.js app, and at that point, everything is orchestrated. Okay, so it's orchestrated through Nagios as a runner for that synthetic transaction. We now have historical metrics for performance and availability. It's executed through a Selenium node with Phantom.js on the back end. Phantom.js is a headless WebKit, and this is what makes this solution much more scalable than a Sauce Labs or a New Relic, because I don't have the overhead of the memory footprint for the browser. The other interesting thing is it actually captures 3 different use cases. One is just performance and availability monitoring. The other is CI/CD implementation. So leveraging GitHub and Jenkins, we're able to drive those unit tests, again, using the Selenium Builder to export that script and basically reuse it as a unit test. And then additionally, load testing. So especially with Phantom.js on the back end. It's ideal for load testing. This solution that you're looking at right here, it took about 2 weeks to put together. I mean, this is something that, is fairly well documented out there, a bunch of these open source components. Our ability to really go and experiment in AWS was the difference between 2 weeks and what would generally have taken 6 to 9 months. Okay, so the bot army. Think, Netflix's Simian army. We wanted to follow a very similar approach. There's multiple terms out there in the landscape right now that are buzzwords. DevOps is certainly one of them. I've heard ArcOps, Ops Dev, you name it, any combination of ops. I don't want any ops. I want no ops. And that was our focus from the very beginning, is to have the right level of automation and orchestration in place that we could scale effectively without having an army of people. Just some quick examples. We'll dig a little bit deeper into 3 of these. But the ogres themselves are, it's very easy to have AWS resource sprawl. Spin something up, I forget about it, I power it off, but it's still sitting there. I've got volumes sitting around that I'm attaching and detaching that are no longer in use. Those things add up. With 1,000 persistent instances in the environment, we needed a way to optimize that other than having someone sitting at the keyboard constantly monitoring for unused resources. So that's why the EC2 ogre, the EBS ogre, Chef was a particular pain point because it was very difficult to get, sort of 100% coverage with Chef. There was always some reason why nodes weren't checking in. Another opportunity to clean up the Chef landscape. A couple of my personal favorites are the disk cleaner and disk expander. Again, leveraging that Nagios infrastructure for event-driven alerting to key off of those metrics to go and then either expand volumes or just do some basic house cleaning. Again, this is something that's a manual ticket in our internal processes, and it generally takes a human to go allocate a new volume or grow a volume. So a few examples of this. Number one, the gen upgrader. New instance types are generally less costly and more performant, and frankly, they're generally a lot more stable. I'm sure you've all gotten the emails and the notifications from AWS saying, hey, you've got an underlying degraded state in your infrastructure, and please move. Or that happens less when you maintain the latest generation. So what we did was we had a monthly outage window for non-production environments as well as production environments. Leveraging a Windows automation server in the AWS SDK for PowerShell, we were able to identify upfront which ones could be upgraded to the next gen and leverage that monthly outage window to just orchestrate the process, right? Which provides optimization and stability in the landscape. Again, if you had to have a team or people manually working through this process, it's coordination with application owners. Can I take your instance down now to upgrade it to the next generation? They probably don't even know why you're asking to begin with, right? So again, a way to simply simplify the user experience as well. The dev downsizer, also one of my personal favorites. We already have a great analytics tool in the environment. It's called Trusted Advisor. So leveraging those Trusted Advisor recommendations in that same monthly outage window, we're taking underutilized instance, less than 10% CPU utilization in the last 2 weeks, less than 5 meg network I/O for 4 days or more. And we're taking those down a notch, right, based on Trusted Advisor recommendations. This one's scheduled against non-production environments today, but again, just a pure way to optimize the landscape. And then one of the pain points that I have, both internally and in cloud, that we were very focused on rectifying was, if I'm a developer or an application owner, and now I have all of this promise of agility in the cloud, I spin up a resource, but I can't log on to it, it's kind of disheartening, right? This is not the cloud that you want. So one of the things that I think is a really great solution is ADOrganizer. Goes and creates a structure in AD, pre-populating certain things and components for our application landscape. That's tied into a credential management system. So you think about some of the pain of having to manage all of the keys when you're spinning up instances. This is sort of embedded into that process. We have the LDAP module enabled as well, so it provides both Linux and Windows authentication that's very seamless to the end user. So they upload their public key once, they can authenticate against anything that they are authorized to access in Active Directory. Again, completely automated, orchestrated, and hands-off. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben Wilson. These are actually his slides, and he's much more entertaining than I am. So I'm going to talk about cloud migration parties.
I'm also the smarter, better-looking Ben, right? Well, maybe not better-looking. If you knew Ben, you knew what a joke that was.
More entertaining.
One of the things I want to mention, too, is I think Ben didn't want to mention it, but I will, is, as we've gone through this transformation, there's been a lot of publicity around it. A lot of work that this team's done has been featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal with the bot army. And you go look at some of this stuff, and the transformational nature of what we've done here with the cloud has really been kind of groundbreaking with inside GE. As you go look at all the other divisions within GE, they look at this and they're trying to imitate it. And we're seeing clients and customers that we work with on a regular basis, they're coming and asking us how to go do this. We run them through slides like this to be able to explain it, but what it really takes is a very, very technical team. If you have a team of project managers, you're probably not going to be successful here, and what I'm going to show you with migration parties, you're probably not going to be successful. You have to have a very, very technical team. You have to partner with people who can help you get over some of the technical hurdles, but you also have to engage with AWS a lot. So I'm going to talk about cloud migration parties. This is a slide that we showed in 2014, and you can see, like, in the beginning we moved some, we didn't move some, we moved some, we didn't move some, and it's kind of how we traditionally started it. And we made a big stepwise jump, right? That stepwise jump didn't happen because of better project plans, right? It didn't happen because we did better issue management, right? We implemented a new tool? No, we didn't implement a new tool either, right? Oh, sorry, wait for it. And we mandated it. Yeah, okay, so that was the other thing, is we mandated it. So we fudged numbers and we lied. No, we didn't do that. This was real numbers that we actually did. And what really happened is we took a different approach, right? We took this idea of having a cloud party. And what's interesting is last year, Andy Jassy actually mentioned it in the executive summit, that we'd done a bunch of cloud parties, and people were having parties around AWS. And when you start branding things, right, and you brand something as a cloud party, and you bring balloons, you bring streamers, you bring a cake, people are like, what the hell are you doing? And what we tried to do is create an atmosphere of technologists who wanted to go and have a little bit of fun and get their tech on. And that is a fundamental difference of what we saw happen within these cloud parties, right? It's not, and you can't do these things via telepresence meeting, you can't do it via conference call, you can't do it via workflows, and it's not really a set of faceless drones, and what that really is, AKA a bunch of guys in India doing it for you. It just does not work that way. And when you go look at the activities you go do and how you go set it up, you got to set it up in an agile manner. If you do not use Agile, I struggle with how you're going to be able to move applications very quickly. The goal of this was to move apps fast. And so there's a lot of people who say, oh, we need to create a factory. I'm like, a factory, okay, a factory that moves apps. I don't understand how that would work because each app is different. They have to be changed slightly differently. And by the way, you also have to have a lot of differentiated capabilities to be able to make it work. And what we decided to do is we decided to do a little bit of planning. We planned sprints. We planned them in 2-week sprints to try to see what we could get done. And then what we did is at certain points in time, we decided to have a cloud party. And when you go look at it, right, we made a lot of mistakes. And that's a little bit what Agile is all about. It allows you to pivot and persevere. And that's what we did a lot. When you go look at each one of the teams that were set up, you look at each one of the cloud parties that we had many, many, many failures. We went in, we wanted to move 25 apps, we'd have to have at least 50 on stack to be able to move. And we wouldn't get through 50, we'd get through 25, sometimes we even got through a few more. But the number of failures we have, a lot of failures. And they were for really stupid reasons, like we should have known better, but we didn't. And again, that's why I go back to this idea of a DevOps kind of culture, is the idea of using Agile and the idea of using DevOps to be able to kind of fundamentally change the organization was a real big lever for us to be successful. And I think too is, when we go look at it, right, we look at kind of the old way, ooh, animation. We look at the old way, I forgot this animation was in there, and you see these big things, they gotta go through each one of the teams, right? What we did instead, we just created these little ninja teams that were part of the cloud party. Oh, wow, that's cool. Sorry, bouncy ball, kind of like that. The idea here is that you have a ninja team that's gonna go take a lot of these apps and just move them, right? A very, very simple approach. And you know, when we originally started this, you go try to explain to CIOs or people who aren't technical, like, what are you gonna go do? Well, we're gonna just create a ninja team, we're just gonna do all the work at once. It's like, well, aren't you gonna write some functional specs? Probably not. Aren't you gonna don't you need technical specs so you know what to do? Well, no, if we have smart technical people, no, I don't need that, right? What we can do is we can just do the work and move it. And then we'll test it and make sure it works. If it doesn't work, well, we just move it back. What's the big deal? And this was a very, very difficult thing for people to understand. We actually had to create this slide so we could explain it to people. And even when they saw this, they're like, I don't know. And what we found is, as we branded the cloud parties, as we went and had these cloud parties, we had, whoops, I went too far. We had a lot of support from each one of the CIO teams and also from the users. When you think about GE Oil and Gas, we're about a $20 billion company. We have over 44,000 employees, plus there's another 20 or 30,000 contractors that work for us. And so it's a huge organization. We have 500 locations throughout the world. I'm embarrassed to tell you how many ERPs we have. But at the end of the day, we have a very, very large organization. And we had to get a lot of people bought in, and you had to be able to explain it in simple terms like this. It's not the best way, but I'll tell you is that being able to get them to understand the value of the cloud party, getting them to understand what happens afterwards, meaning no P1 and P0 tickets, was a real benefit for us. I think you have the next slide, don't you? Okay, so that's yours.
All right, so with any initiative, you're going to run into roadblocks. So these are some of the things that we ran into while migrating these applications and what we did to kind of get around them. So the first thing you're going to do is when you're looking to migrate your applications to AWS, you need to build up an application pipeline of clouds that are able to move to the cloud. So we were able to leverage a subject matter expert in the business that we worked with, and this is someone who really knows the entire application portfolio, as well as the technical owners and team members that you need to work with, and can really drive adoption to the program. Then once we got those technical owners that we could work with, doing a little bit of social engineering with them, asking them, the right questions. So your application sits on this server. Hey, are there any other applications that sit on this server that, we can migrate at the same time? Or what other applications do you own that may be good candidates to move? And then really incentivizing them to move to the cloud, right? So all the capabilities and functionalities that were built, as well as the cost savings that come along with moving to AWS. Kind of how you manage doing your migrations. So the preparation. Really getting with your users, your technical teams, any testers you may need to have, talk to them ahead of time, let them know what to expect. Talk about their schedules, right? Are there any application upgrades coming on to this application? Are there any vacations you may have coming up? Anything that is gonna, hinder the application migration, and really planning for that ahead of time so you can maximize the time that you have with them to do your migrations. And then along with that, planning with any third-party vendors as well. So we've worked with a lot of third-party vendors in oil and gas, and the biggest thing really is validating that the licensing with those vendors supports cloud, and sometimes that's educating them on what the cloud means. They may not understand that. They may think that you are going to go against the license somehow. So really talking to them about that, and then collaborating with them. We've been very successful pulling them in very often for installs, any type of modifications or configurations that may need to be made. Just really helps to speed the process up. And then the team composition. I know we touched on this a little bit before, but we started out in a very siloed methodology when we started this. We had someone who came in and did due diligence on applications to determine if they could move to the cloud. We then, maybe the same person, maybe a different person, did the discovery and the design for those applications, what they're going to look like when you move them to AWS, and then brought in another person to build out the infrastructure, do your deployments, installations, configurations, work with the users to test, and then cut over. And what we were finding is that when we did that, we had a lot of overlap with those people. At sometimes we were spending up to 50% more time on these applications. So really, getting that out of the way, getting one person who is an expert and can take it wing to wing really helped us to drive the migration times.
Yeah, one thing we specifically don't have on here is the security piece. That's a whole different presentation. So that's one of the reasons it's not on here. But there are a lot of security challenges we had to overcome, that's for sure. We still overcome them every day. But I think it's impossible to have that conversation and have this discussion too.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you, Ben. So I'm gonna really wrap up here with a summary of lessons learned, and this is sort of a summary, if I had to put it in my own words, of 18 months of lessons that I think we can carry with us from this point forward. Automation should be clear at this point that heavy focus on automation. With the landscapes and volumes that we're building in Amazon, a lot of the tools and native services that are available, it's the only way to survive at scale. When we started this journey, we had 4 or 5 operations resources in our CTO team managing this space with 0 applications in AWS. With 261 applications in AWS, we still had 4 or 5 resources. So it's very important to focus on that automation and orchestration. Ben touched on security at every layer. I think we learned and expected early on to use all of the capabilities in AWS at every layer, whether it's NACLs, security groups, et cetera, to make sure those were implemented in a least privilege model. Right? We feel comfortable that AWS is at least as safe as our internal environment. It allows our teams, particularly our legal and security teams, to feel confident in us placing applications in a multi-tenant environment. We already talked about embracing Agile. So, building an Agile program and an Agile structure is not something you would typically think of doing when thinking about cloud migration. It's applicable pretty much for everything, following generic principles like people over process. But actually creating a structure for this program that was Agile from the very beginning, we didn't know what we didn't know. We had to learn Agile as much as we had to learn how to move applications to the cloud, but it was an iterative approach. I think the whole team learned a great deal along the way. Work instead of workflow is kind of eliminating the human element. Again, if it's in a workflow, it should probably just be automated, orchestrated wing to wing. We don't really like workflows. We don't like sign-offs and gates in between, the traditional waterfall approach with gates and with toll gates, et cetera. One of my personal favorites is bias toward action. So again, I think one of the bigger challenges is having to address application owners when they say, my application can't move to the cloud. Well, why not? Is it a cost discussion? Is it some sort of sensitivity or just the feeling that somehow my application is safer in our internal environment versus AWS? And now my tendency is just to say, well, we'll just move it for you, right? Let's just take that dev application, we'll take a copy of one of your non-production environments, we'll run it up and let you test it a little bit. If you don't like it, we'll kill it. So we have that ability in the cloud where we simply didn't ever have that opportunity internally. Ben talked a lot about risks. We have made it a point to celebrate failure. That was part of the Agile learning as well. We've brought in so many tools and so many vendors throughout this process. And I think our general tendency for the last decade has just been to try and make it work. Right? If the vendor or the product or the service met 80% of our requirements, let's just make it work. Unfortunately, that took our time, it took our resources, It took more money. And it didn't bring a solution any faster. So we were okay with failing, bringing something in that we couldn't bet on 100% and be willing to throw it out on a dime. We talked about Racimi. Racimi approached us and said, hey, we have this great tool. I said, okay, if I can press the button and move a workload, I'm game. When we actually kicked the tires on it, in the next 24 hours, we found some pretty significant deficiencies. And we said, look, maybe not now. Maybe we'll look at it later because we don't really have time to slow down and partner with you right now. And they said, well, look, we'll come back in 30 days. We'll fix all of your concerns. We'll actually enhance the product even more than you asked for if you'll just meet with us one more time. And they walked back into the office 30 days later, and they did exactly what they said they were going to do. So we have to take risks in places. I don't think we have to accept mediocrity, but we certainly have to celebrate failure along the way. And then finally, just some of the overarching enablers. Collaboration is incredibly important. So one of the biggest and most important things we did early on was we embedded our security and risk teams into our cloud migration program. And we actually kicked out a bunch of accelerators and solutions with cloud HSM, encryption key management that are now leveraged as best practices with our corporate team and our other businesses. Having the right top-down leadership, both at the CEO level, the CIO level, the CTO level, right? Making sure that all of your leadership is driving this cloud-first methodology from the top down is incredibly important. And then rebuilding the skill set from the bottom up is also terribly important. We tended to be an army of project managers within GE, specifically IT, and outsource a lot of those functions. We're now taking an insourcing approach and starting to rebuild really contemporary skill sets, which is great for our people, and it's great for our progress. Cloud aware. So this is kind of a philosophical debate, right? And it's analogous to those large work pieces versus those little work pieces. Is rehosting, is lifting and shifting okay? I assert that it absolutely is, particularly for the enterprise, if it maximizes margin, agility, resilience, and performance. This is one of the reasons we move faster in oil and gas versus maybe some of the other businesses in our company, with the understanding that even to decommission something today internally can take upwards of 6 weeks. And in the Amazon environment, clearly I can press the button in the console and immediately terminate something. So, I think that there's a ton of native benefit in the native service capability, the resilience like we already talked about, with ELBs, auto-scaling groups, multi-AZ capability that we simply spend too long architecting in our internal environment. And then finally, just maintaining a healthy pipeline. Discovery is a challenge for most enterprises, but maintaining a healthy pipeline of 50 plus ensures that you'll have consistent velocity. We've seen very clearly that when that starts to drop down, our velocity slows pretty dramatically. So I think we're just about out of time. I would like to thank those folks that are kind enough to be up here with me. I'd like to thank Capgemini and Sogeti for sponsoring the session and for having us here today.